A death row veteran's last wish to see his Mustang horse. Then the shocking truth emerged. Before the sun could rise over the prison yard, a decorated soldier had only a few hours left to live. He didn't ask for a final meal, he didn't request a phone call to say goodbye. All he wanted was to see a wild Mustang he once saved on a distant battlefield. A wish that seemed strange, perhaps even meaningless, until it revealed a truth powerful enough to shake the entire justice system to its core. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, don't forget to hit subscribe. Major Elias Boone was 38 when he first realized that the quiet tragedies of war did not end on the battlefield. During his final deployment with the Army Special Forces, he had served in an operation codenamed Red Trail, a high-risk raid near the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. By that time, Elias had completed 2 tours in the Middle East and a Bronze Star for valor in combat. He was known among his fellow soldiers for his disciplined mind, straightforward ethics, and a level of tactical ingenuity that set him apart from the rest. Yet Red Trail would become the shadow looming over his life. The operation ended in a haze of conflicting reports and unconfirmed numbers of casualties. Soldiers whispered about suspicious gaps in documentation, missing names, missing bodies, even entire skirmishes that seemed to have been wiped from the official record. Rumors circulated that certain figures high in the chain of command had deliberately minimized the mission's losses. Some said the US public would never learn the real cost of those final weeks in the border region. Elias, however, was not the type to keep silent. He noticed discrepancies in the after-action reports, medical notes detailing injuries that did not match the reported firefight timeline, or body transfer documents that labeled caskets with the names. "Why are we listing fewer casualties than we had?" he asked. "Or how come these men are all apparently accounted for, but I recall a different number on the ground?" When he pressed his immediate superior, the responses were polite but dismissive. "Classified," they said. "You're not cleared for that data," they said, and then more ominously, "Focus on your orders, Major. Let the brass handle the details." He did not let it go. Red Trail had changed him, and while he was never one to stand by as the truth was twisted for convenience, he found himself pushing harder than ever before. After filing multiple written concerns to higher-ranking officers, he received a curt directive: accept a medical discharge for combat trauma, or face a more severe inquiry. The official reason was that Elias exhibited symptoms of war psychological stress. The unofficial reason, as Elias understood it, was that the Army wanted him gone quickly and quietly. The institution he had served since his early 20s, which had once pinned a Bronze Star on his uniform, now forced him out, to keep him from asking more questions. Disheartened and carrying an honorable discharge slip that felt more like a forced exit, Elias Boone returned to the state. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, he was a civilian, drifting in a world where the lines of accountability seemed just as blurred as on the battlefield. He felt betrayed. He had expected an explanation, maybe even an admission that Red Trail had been deeply flawed, but all he got was silence. The Army, it seemed, had closed the door on him. After a few aimless months, Elias was unexpectedly contacted by a private military contractor, Keene Defense Contracting. The company was owned by Colonel Silas Keene, a now retired officer who had once served as Elias's superior in Afghanistan. Keene was known for his long-standing connections to the Pentagon and for running private logistics in conflict zones around the world. Through an intermediary, Keene offered Elias a position as an internal auditing liaison, a role that would involve reviewing supply chains and financials at various overseas hubs. Elias, who was struggling to find stable employment, felt both suspicious and strangely relieved. At least this was work in a realm he understood, and he needed to earn money to help support June, his former partner, who was battling a severe health condition. A stable job, plus the promise that Silas Keene could use a man of principle, gave Elias a faint glimmer of hope. Perhaps this was a chance to rebuild his life. He started at Keene Defense Contracting's headquarters in Arizona, signing confidentiality agreements and adjusting to the quasi-military environment of the staff. Many were ex-soldiers, with a code of silence around sensitive operations. Colonel Silas Keene, though polite, did not encourage casual conversation with Elias about Red Trail. Whenever Elias hinted at it, like a half-joking remark about how they had last served together in that fiasco, Keene brushed it off. we have bigger tasks now, the older man would say. This is about cleaning the books, making sure we're ready for any federal oversight coming our way. You handle audits well, Boone, so keep your focus there. On the surface, Elias's position was straightforward. Examine shipping invoices for equipment, track the receipts for personal protective gear, and confirm the status of privately contracted personnel overseas. The deeper Elias looked, though, the more he spotted anomalies. Haphazardly labeled crates that contained used rifles yet were billed as brand new high-tier weapons, or payroll sheets paying monthly wages to servicemen who, according to the Army's own records, had died months before. In one instance, he found a six-figure sum allocated for transportation of advanced ballistic gear, but the same gear was listed under a different name at half the cost. He thought back to Red Trail, remembering how the losses had been misrepresented. Here too, figures were being manipulated, but now with a profit motive. The biggest red flag emerged when he reviewed a file marked with the name First Lieutenant Richard Keene. The official Army records stated that Richard Keene, Silas's younger brother, had died in Red Trail receiving posthumous honors, but the internal documents at Keene Defense Contracting included ongoing payments labeled Family Compensation Next of Kin, which was standard procedure for a soldier KIA. However, the disbursements were oddly structured and repeated beyond the typical time frame. Elias tried to locate the official death certificate or medical examiner's report. Instead, he found only blurry scanned images and references to a coffin transfer that never conclusively identified the remains as Richard Keene's. Was Richard truly dead? The more Elias studied, the more it seemed that the entire situation might have been staged. He recalled how in Red Trail there had been confusion around a final dust-off helicopter. Some claimed it held an injured soldier, others said it was carrying a body bag. If Richard Keene were still alive, then Colonel Silas Keene was potentially orchestrating not only an insurance or benefit fraud, but possibly covering up something larger, like a weapons diversion scandal, or a link to illegal arms deals. Elias, uneasy but resolute, decided he had to voice his suspicions. Rather than conduct a quiet probe, Elias confronted Colonel Keene direct. He requested a closed-door meeting in the colonel's glass-walled office, explaining that he needed to highlight financial discrepancies that might endanger the company if a federal investigation discovered them first. Calmly, Elias presented the bullet points: ghost employees, inflated contract costs, and the suspicious record of Richard Keene's death benefits. Silas listened in a stony silence, his eyes never leaving Elias's face. When Elias finished, the colonel simply said, "You are overstepping your duties, Major Boone. I never asked you to form theories or pry into personal matters. Stick to reconciling numbers. Let me handle the rest." Elias insisted that ignoring the matter could have grave consequences. If the Department of Justice audits us, he warned, this entire operation might collapse and we'd be looking at criminal charges. You don't want that, sir. Silas Keene's expression remained impassive. "I appreciate your diligence," he replied in a measured tone, "but these are sensitive files. The less you know about them, the better it is for everyone." 2 days later, an internal memo summoned Elias to a remote storage facility located near the edge of a desert plain. They claimed a new batch of raw data needed auditing, and only he had the clearance to review it. Suspicious but bound by duty, Elias arrived at the dusty, poorly lit warehouse. Inside he found rows of sealed crates, and in a far corner the lifeless body of a young veteran he recognized from a prior complaint about missing hazard pay. The man had apparently been investigating the same contract fraud. A stab wound glistened dark against his uniform. Horrified, Elias knelt beside the corpse, pulling away a tarp partially covering the body, and inadvertently cutting his own hand in the process. Blood from the deceased smeared across Elias's forearm. He realized with dawning dread that not only had someone murdered this whistleblower, but they intended to frame him as well. Spotting his standard-issue combat knife protruding from the victim's side, his knife that he kept locked in a trunk at home, Elias understood the scale of the setup. Cameras in the area would likely be broken, witnesses would be non-existent. Everything had been orchestrated to show that Elias discovered the facility, confronted the victim, and killed him. Before he could flee, armed men from Keene's private security team stormed in, leveling accusations of murder and tampering with government property. He tried to protest, pointing to his own shock and confusion, but they swiftly disarmed him, zip-tied his hands, and marched him out. Surreal though it was, Elias realized that Colonel Silas Keene had turned him into a scapegoat for the company's illicit dealings, and perhaps to hide the secret of Richard Keene's survival. The official incident report stated that Elias Boone, in an unprovoked rage, killed a colleague who had discovered evidence of Boone's involvement in arms smuggling. Conveniently, the security cameras in that section of the warehouse had malfunctioned. Anyone else in the area had been reassigned or had vanished. The stage was complete. A tribunal within the military framework was hastily convened, labeled as a joint court-martial with cooperation from civilian authorities. In truth, it was a rushed proceeding heavily influenced by Colonel Keene's circle of allies. Elias was assigned a defense lawyer with minimal experience in high-profile cases, someone who clearly lacked the resources or inclination to dig into what was really happening. Whenever Elias tried to bring up the possibility that Richard Keene was alive, the prosecutor dismissed it as a fantasy triggered by post-traumatic stress. A snippet of audio had surfaced, allegedly capturing a conversation between Silas and Richard, but the authorities declared it a doctored fake. Requests to examine the original audio were denied. Elias maintained his innocence, repeating how the real conspiracy was bigger: missing funds, stolen weapons, and a fake death scenario that must be unmasked. But the tribunal consistently labeled him as mentally unstable or in denial. Even those who had once served under him seemed afraid to speak on his behalf, presumably warned by Colonel Keene or coerced through non-disclosure agreements. Within 3 short hearings, Elias was stripped of his rank, found guilty of murder, and transferred out of the military's jurisdiction, dishonorably discharged and recommended for capital prosecution in the civilian court system, read one official statement, making it clear that even if he somehow dodged a life sentence in military detention, the state-level murder charges could lead to the death penalty, and it did. The county's district attorney, relying almost entirely on the evidence compiled by Keene's internal security team, took the case to trial. The evidence package included Elias's fingerprints on the knife, traces of the victim's blood on Elias's uniform, and a contrived motive that he wanted to silence the victim who could have blown the whistle on his purported arms smuggling operation. No mention was made of Colonel Silas Keene's involvement or the questionable death of Richard Keene. The judge, unwilling to challenge a seemingly open and shut case, restricted the defense's ability to call outside witnesses, claiming relevancy issues. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence: death by lethal injection. By this point, the mainstream media had found a sensational headline: decorated vet turned murderer, did post-war trauma lead to fatal rage? Journalists implied that Elias was just another tragic example of an ex-soldier who cracked under the weight of PTSD. A few critics questioned the speed of the legal process, but these voices were overshadowed by sensational accounts of Elias's alleged meltdown. Nothing was said about the deeper layers of corruption, the suspicious hush around Red Trail, or the possibility that the real culprit was someone with far greater power. The day the sentencing concluded, the state escorted Elias Boone to Red Rock Correctional Facility, a maximum security prison in the heart of the Arizona desert. Housing only a small number of death row inmates, Red Rock was notorious for its isolation and the strictness of its security protocol. Surrounded by sun-scorched earth and ringed by high fences topped with razor wire, it felt more like a fortress lost in time than a modern penitentiary. Entering the main gate, Elias watched a swirl of dust settle on the toes of his prison-issue boots. Guards with rifles stood in towers, and beyond them, an endless horizon of rocky terrain glowed under the relentless sun. Elias's mind was numb with disbelief. A year ago he had been Major Boone, investigating financial irregularities in a private contracting firm. Now he was prisoner 1103-3, condemned to die in a place that epitomized desperation. The corridor to the death row wing was a tunnel of dull gray cinderblock walls, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Every door had an electronic lock that slid open only when the guard pressed a code. Elias was assigned a cell measuring roughly 8 by 10 feet, a narrow bunk, a toilet, and a single overhead bulb. From the small slit of a window high up, only a fragment of sky was visible. That fragment changed color with the passing hours but never showed anything else. No horizon, no sign of life. The monotony was suffocating. News outlets briefly covered his arrival at Red Rock, but as soon as a more sensational story broke elsewhere, they moved on. He was left in near anonymity, labeled a violent ex-soldier who had betrayed his uniform. For many months no visitors came. June, his only family in spirit, was herself battling severe health issues,
and lacked the means or energy to travel. The state-appointed public defender was swamped with other cases and rarely visited, each time bringing disheartening updates. Appeals denied, motions to reopen the case rejected, no leads for new evidence. And so Elias, once a resolute army major, found himself in an invisible limbo. The rest of the world seemed determined to forget him or to remember him only as the PTSD-riddled murderer. He spent long hours replaying the events that led him here. If he had kept his head down and not questioned the Red Trail anomalies, maybe he would still be free, but then he would be lying to himself about everything the army stood for: honor, integrity, the obligation to protect one's fellow soldiers. One thought, however, kept returning to him in the dark. Solace, the horse he had bonded with during a particular operation near an old research outpost. Solace, a black Mustang with an oddly soulful gaze, was an animal that Elias had saved from a disposal order. In those final weeks before his arrest, he had entrusted Solace to June's care, certain that no human witness could be fully trusted, but perhaps that horse might. Looking back, he realized it sounded absurd. Yet sometimes lying awake on the thin mattress at Red Rock, he remembered how Solace would look at him with calm intelligence, as if to say, "I know who you really are." No matter what stories the media spun, no matter how forcibly Colonel Keene shaped the narrative, Solace was the living link to the truth. If there was anyone or anything in the world that could prove Elias's innocence, without bias, without bribe, without fear, it was that Mustang, an animal beyond the reach of manipulative words. But how could a horse exonerate a condemned man? No one believed it was possible, especially not in a system that had already labeled Elias Boone a monster. Elias Boone had been on death row at Red Rock Correctional Facility for 5 years. In those first weeks of confinement, he lost most of his sense of time. Days and nights fused together in a dull haze of fluorescent lighting, routine head counts, and the echo of heavy doors sliding shut. His world shrank to the dimensions of an 8 by 10-foot cell. A box of concrete painted a lifeless gray, fitted with a narrow bunk and a metal sink to toilet. The corridor outside never seemed to bring a breeze or a single hint of the desert sun. If the wind howled at night or if a sandstorm raged outside, Elias wouldn't know.
He always woke with a tightness in his chest, aware that no matter how many times he relived it, he was still locked in Red Rock, waiting for the day the state chose to end his life. No one among the other condemned men tried to bond with him. Each had his own regrets, his own system of coping. Some prayed aloud, others screamed during the night only to be sedated. Elias remained stoic, though inside he felt the edges of his sanity fraying. He found that if he closed his eyes for too long, the claustrophobia overwhelmed him. If he kept them open, the blank walls mocked him. It was an endless cycle. And always in the background of his mind, like a faint drumbeat, was the memory of a black Mustang named Solace. The one living creature he felt certain understood him without words. As the prison lights flickered or footsteps passed outside his door, Elias often recalled the nights he had spent with that horse, standing beside him under the open sky. If the truth were an animal, he sometimes thought it would be a Mustang, wild, hard to break, and far beyond the reach of corruption. Solace had come into Elias's life during his final winter of active duty at a remote base near El Paso. The army was shutting down a small compound that had once been used for behavioral experiments on wild animals, an odd project some higher-up had authorized long ago. The story was that any unclaimed animals were to be euthanized. When Elias first entered that compound, he found rows of cages and pens in a state of disrepair. A pungent smell of old straw and disinfectant clung to the air, and the corridors echoed with the occasional shuffle of hooves. In one pen, a black Mustang stood tethered, eyes fierce and unyielding. The soldier in charge had scrawled "Untrainable Destroy" on a note pinned to the fence. The horse's glossy coat was marred by a few scratches, suggesting it had tried and failed to fight free of the constraints. Most striking were its eyes, one a pale, almost icy blue and the other a warm brown. They locked on to Elias the moment he approached. The gaze wasn't frantic or frightened, it held a guarded kind of dignity. Elias felt something stir within him. He unlatched the pen's door. Another staff member shouted, "Careful, Major, that one's been known to kick." But Elias simply stood there, meeting the horse's mismatched stare. The Mustang snorted, pawing the ground a little, but it did not bolt. Slowly it stepped forward. Elias could feel the animal's breath against his chest. In that moment it lowered its head, pressing gently against him as if acknowledging him alone. Curious about how an animal labeled too wild, too broken could connect so readily, Elias lobbied his commanding officer for permission to keep the Mustang on base, rather than send it off for euthanasia. Eventually the CO relented, on the condition that Elias assumed full responsibility. From then on the horse was his. He named it Solace, partly out of irony, partly because he sensed that this creature, in its silent presence, could ease the unseen turmoil in his own heart. Before dawn each morning Elias would slip into the makeshift stable he had set up behind the old hangar. He'd find Solace awake, tossing its head in greeting. No matter the weather they'd walk the perimeter or ride near the barbed wire fence marking the training grounds, accompanied only by the whisper of desert wind. Solace needed no saddle or bridle. It followed Elias's lead by some unspoken accord, trusting him to guide it without force. Years later, stuck in Red Rock with no windows to the outside world, Elias remembered those rides as if they were lifelines. The gray desert morning would stretch out in front of him while Solace's breath condensed in the chilly air. He would gently place a hand on the Mustang's mane, feeling the coursed strands between his fingers. Some days he almost believed that the horse could sense his mood. Its steps slowed when he was preoccupied, or it nudged him when he lingered too long in thought. Solace, for its part, never let another soldier ride it, no matter how skilled they were with horses. More than once a curious private had attempted to mount or lead it away, only to be knocked flat by a swift kick. Elias, who had grown accustomed to a life of discipline and caution, felt something distinctly pure in Solace's presence, an honesty free from the politics and betrayals of men. The horse had no hidden agenda. It wanted nothing but care, companionship, and open space. Through those cold El Paso mornings, Elias found a sense of peace he hadn't felt since before Red Trail. And so, in Red Rock's numb hours, he clung to these memories: the steady rise and fall of Solace's flanks, the sound of hooves on packed dirt, the sky turning from indigo to orange over the ridges. He replayed them in his mind, over and over, like a movie reel, preserving what precious freedom felt like. Solace would not tolerate other humans. Veterinarians who tried to administer shots or routine checks complained that the Mustang lashed out, ears pinned back, teeth bared. Even the stable hands' battle-tested soldiers found themselves spooked. That thing's possessed, one said. Look at its eyes. Another time a sergeant attempted to move Solace to a different pen. The horse shattered a wooden gate and sent the man to the infirmary with a broken wrist. To Elias, however, Solace was never violent or unpredictable. The horse was simply resolute, refusing to be handled by strangers. It was as though it had chosen a single person to trust, and that person happened to be the soldier with scars from war in his mind. Elias felt the parallel in their circumstances. "If I'm just another discarded tool of war," he wrote once in his personal journal, "then so is Solace, an experiment left to be thrown away." Maybe that's why we understand each other. Years into his confinement, whenever Elias sank into the half-lucid space between waking and sleeping, he conjured that bond. He imagined the press of Solace's head against his chest, that silent question in the animal's mismatched eyes. He believed Solace recognized his integrity in a way that no human investigator or judge ever had. Over time, the Mustang grew into the last anchor to his sense of self. If the rest of the world insisted on calling him a murderer, at least he knew one living being that remembered him differently. In nightmares triggered by the warehouse incident, Elias often saw blood on his hands and heard the faint beep of security cameras, but the same nightmares almost always ended with the echo of hooves, as if Solace were galloping closer. In those instances, Elias would wake with a ragged breath, but feel oddly reassured. Even locked in a concrete cell, he felt a shadow of that quiet presence. Before his wrongful arrest, Elias had called June McAllister, a veterinary nurse he'd once been romantically involved with. They had met back when Elias was struggling to adapt to civilian life, drifting in and out of jobs. June, already challenged by a thyroid condition that left her in constant need of medication, found Elias's detached demeanor both intriguing and heartbreaking. They parted ways because Elias couldn't handle normalcy. He was restless, always on edge, while June needed stability during her treatments. Still, they cared for each other more than either admitted. Upon discovering the storm that was about to break over his head, Elias phoned June from a payphone outside the old barracks. "Look," he had told her, voice thick with urgency, "I'm in trouble, real trouble. People might come for me soon."
I need someone I can trust to take care of Solace. June didn't hesitate. Are you sure you want me to handle him? He barely tolerates strangers. Elias paused. He won't be a problem, if it's you. He knows I trust you. And you, he swallowed, unwilling to say goodbye. You're the only one left who might still believe me, she answered softly. Bring him. I'll do my best. 2 days later he loaded Solace into a trailer, driving to June's small ranch on the outskirts of Sweetwater. The property was modest, just a rambling wooden house and a barn. The sign out front read, McAllister Veterinary Rescue, though June ran it almost entirely alone. Her condition meant she often had less strength than she liked, but she told Elias that caring for animals gave her a reason to fight for her own health. Solace walked out of the trailer with minimal fuss, as if sensing it was a place where he would be safe. While patting the Mustang's shoulder, Elias murmured, "He won't betray me. If anything happens, please, June, keep him alive. That's all I ask." Within a week, Colonel Keene's men came for Elias. The last sound he remembered from that night was June screaming in protest, as armed security bundled him away. He never learned how she managed afterward, left on her ranch with a wild Mustang that barely cooperated with anyone. But from the letters that trickled through the prison censors, he picked up small details. June's ongoing chemotherapy, or her exhaustion after a long day trying to feed the animals. She mentioned Solace, suggesting, though no other caretaker could approach him. "He's calmer than I expected," she wrote once. "He stands near me when I do my chores as if to watch over me. Maybe it's your spirit in him." It was enough to keep Elias believing that at least one part of his life remained untainted. Even as the appeals failed and the prospect of a new trial evaporated, the knowledge that Solace existed somewhere beyond these walls gave him a shred of hope. Without the horse, he might have surrendered entirely to despair. By the 5th year, all illusions Elias had harbored about justice had crumbled. His court-appointed attorney visited once a month, each time looking more worn out than before. Documents sprawled across the desk in the interview room revealed repeated denials of new motions. Witnesses had vanished or refused to come forward. The system was as unyielding as the desert around Red Rock, indifferent to nuance or pleas of innocence. When the official notice of his execution date arrived, set for mid-June, Elias took it with calm acceptance. He read the stiff bureaucratic language detailing the method of lethal injection and the schedule for final arrangements. Oddly, he felt neither shock nor rage. He just felt empty. He folded the paper and set it on the small metal shelf in his cell. Then, late that evening, he wrote a letter. In neat, measured handwriting, he addressed it to the warden. "I have no need for a special meal. I have no phone call to make. I only have one request. I want to see Solace, my Mustang. I want 15 minutes with him in the exercise yard, under guard if necessary. He is the only living creature who never abandoned me, and he is still alive. I know that much. That is all I ask before I die." He signed it, Elias Boone, inmate 1143, death row. He expected an immediate rejection. No policy existed for bringing a horse into a high-security prison, let alone onto death row. When he turned in the letter to a guard, the man scoffed. "What next? You want a circus in the yard?" But Elias merely nodded, as if to say yes. I know it sounds insane. Perhaps he intended for it to be more symbolic than literal. A final chance to speak the only truth he had left, that in a world of human deceit, his Mustang was the one soul he needed. For days, he heard nothing. Then, Warden Clay Harlan, a quiet, heavy-set man known for his meticulous sense of fairness, summoned Elias to the small warden's office. Harlan cleared his throat and said, "We don't usually honor requests like these, but your record as an inmate has been respectful. No incident. I forwarded your petition to the prosecutor's office. We'll see." Elias thanked him in a low voice. He returned to his cell, uncertain if it was false hope. In a place like Red Rock, the line between impossible and improbable was thin, yet for the first time in half a decade, Elias felt a flicker of anticipation. The idea that he might stand in a yard, watch Solace approach, and lay his hand on that wild mane once more. It filled him with a fragile warmth he hadn't known he could still feel. Whether the prison officials would allow it or not, the very act of asking gave him a reason to look at the gray ceiling with something other than defeat. And in the stillness of that night he closed his eyes, and conjured the memory of Solace, galloping across a stretch of red-brown earth, free under the open sky. If all he had left was a single moment of truth, then that moment belonged to him and the horse that had never turned away. Morning came too quietly at June McAllister's small ranch in Sweetwater. Normally she could hear the rhythmic clack of hooves in the pre-dawn light. Solace stepping around his enclosure, sometimes snorting softly in the crisp air. But today the silence woke her before the alarm could ring. She sat up in bed, a thin film of worry already coursing through her veins. The clock on her nightstand read 6 o'clock a.m. June had grown used to the sounds the Mustang made every morning. It was a comfort, a sign of life on an otherwise lonely property. Ever since she'd taken Solace in after Elias was wrongfully arrested, she had discovered how much an animal's routine could become woven into her own. Though the horse demanded constant vigilance, it rewarded her with a steadfast presence that eased the ache of her solitude. Now, hearing nothing at all, she slipped on her boots and a flannel jacket, then stepped outside. The ranch lay under a pale sky tinged with the first hints of sunrise. Low desert scrub dotted with cacti and wiry shrubs stretched across the property. In the distance she saw the silhouette of a half-broken fence, but all of that she registered only peripherally. Her mind was fixed on Solace's enclosure near the old barn. Her heart jumped when she noticed the gate wide open. She hurried closer. Loose wires dangled where the main latch was supposed to be. The metal fasteners were twisted and frayed. She could make out scuff marks in the dusty ground, hoof prints that led away from the enclosure, along with some deeper grooves, as if something heavy had been dragged, but the interior lock was still latched from the inside. Confusion rattled her. How could the gate be forced open from outside if the lock was engaged? Solace, her voice carried a trembling edge. She half expected him to whinny in response, perhaps injured and hiding behind the barn, but nothing moved. Not even a stray cat. A wave of panic gripped her. Solace was gone. June checked the feed bin. Untouched. The rope caddy hung crooked, its older rope missing. Had someone stolen him? The very thought was bizarre. A wild Mustang with a known tendency to reject strangers would not be an easy target for a typical horse thief. Besides, her ranch was far from the usual routes criminals might use. This felt personal, and it terrified her. She rushed inside the barn where a dusty security camera system was mounted. Months ago she had installed a few second-hand cameras around the property, more as a precaution than anything else. The system wasn't reliable. It often froze or lost power, but it might hold clues. Sweeping away cobwebs, June turned on the old CRT monitor. One camera feed flickered to life, showing a faint grayscale image of the corral in front of Solace's stall. In near darkness at 4:43 a.m., a tall figure in a long coat could be seen quietly coaxing Solace out of the enclosure. Solace pulled back at first, but the stranger had a firm grip leading the Mustang forward. The poor resolution made it impossible to see the individual's face. A moment later they vanished out of frame. June's heart pounded. She shut the monitor off with a trembling hand. This wasn't a random theft. It was too deliberate, too silent. She glanced at the clock again. 6:15 a.m. She knew that Elias Boone's execution was scheduled for later that morning. He had been promised a final visit with Solace, something the warden had apparently agreed to, albeit reluctantly. Now with the horse gone, that last wish was likely ruined. Desperation swelled within her. She snatched her phone from the barn's workbench and scrolled to a number she had rarely used. Caleb Ward, a retired Army investigator and the man who once oversaw disciplinary reviews for soldiers like Elias. He had become disillusioned with the system, after seeing too many suspicious cases swept under the rug. If anyone could help track down a stolen Mustang on short notice, it was Caleb, and if this was connected to the bigger conspiracy she suspected, they had no time to spare. Caleb answered on the second ring, his voice gravelly, with either sleep or tension. Ward speaking. Caleb, this is June McAllister. It's about Solace. He's gone. He fell silent for half a second, then said, stolen? Yes, or, I don't know, she stammered. I found the gate forced open, and with the execution looming, I can't think it's just a coincidence. Where are you now? He asked, voice steadying in an instant. I'm at the ranch. I found some tracks leading out toward the north boundary near the old road. The feed is untouched, so the horse must have been taken sometime before dawn. My camera caught a tall man in a coat leading Solace away. Caleb released a sigh that crackled through the phone. All right, I'll be there in 30 minutes. True to his word, he arrived in a battered SUV loaded with gear. He was a tall man with silver hair cropped short, his posture still military and straight. Once a key figure in Army investigative units, he'd retired under less than amicable terms. Frustrated by the bureaucracy that had allowed cases like Elias's to slip away without justice, June quickly explained what she knew, showing him the camera footage. Caleb's expression hardened. That brand of operation, stealing a horse right before a final death row visit, smacks of intimidation or sabotage. Colonel Keene's name leaps to mind. She nodded. Elias's last wish is to see Solace. If the horse doesn't show, the prison could just say it's not their fault. Then Elias goes to his death with no closure, and whoever orchestrated this might ensure no new evidence emerges. Her voice trembled on that final point, remembering how Elias believed Solace might be key to revealing something bigger. They walked out to the enclosure where Caleb crouched to examine the tracks. We have fresh hoofprints here heading north. He eyed the faint marks left by an older truck or trailer. Seems they transferred him onto a larger vehicle up the road. He stood and glanced at his watch. We have only a few hours until the scheduled execution. If we don't get Solace to Red Rock in time, Elias's last chance might be lost. Did you know Elias suspected the horse was carrying crucial evidence? He used to talk about it, off the record, something about files hidden on the harness or some microdrive. June shivered. He never told me details, but it's not impossible. Solace would let only Elias near enough to hide anything in his mane or under the bridle. If Colonel Keene realized that, stealing the horse might be a way to bury the truth. Without another word, they headed to Caleb's SUV. He explained that he had some contacts in the local department who might provide traffic camera footage. We'll check every possible road leading out of Sweetwater, then we'll figure out if there's a more direct lead. Less than an hour later, June found herself bouncing in the passenger seat of Caleb's SUV, the windows rattling as they tore down a gravel road heading north. The early morning sun glared across the horizon, painting the desert in harsh gold tones. Checking a weather-beaten map, Caleb said, "There's an old ranger post up ahead. Shiloh Ranger Post. Shut down about 6 years ago. Good place to hide for a quick transfer if you wanted to move a large animal." When they arrived, the small compound looked desolate. A few crumbling cabins, a rusted radio tower, and a collapsed stable that might once have held rescue horses. They got out, the dust swirling around their boots. Sure enough, hoofprints dotted the sandy soil, accompanied by deeper impressions that suggested a large crate or box had been dragged across the ground. "What is this?" June murmured, bending down to pick up a torn scrap of leather with coarse stitching. A few strands of black horsehair clung to it, along with the pungent smell of saddle oil. This might have come from Solace's tech. Caleb nodded grimly. "Looks like they parked a vehicle here, and loaded him into something. The question is, where next?" He scouted the area, eventually discovering a small stash of feed sacks behind a lean-to. The labels read, "Frontier Stock Feed," a brand defunct for 2 years. June's mind flashed to Elias's timeline. 2 years was about how long he'd already been locked in the appeals process. That ties back to Keene's old supply chain. Caleb said, Frontier Depot was their main transport hub, and it got shut down once the allegations about missing weapons started. Could be the next link in the chain. They wasted no time. Caleb studied fresh tire tracks leading toward an overgrown path, confirming it was wide enough for a trailer or box truck. Frontier Depot is about 12 miles from here. Let's pray we're not already too late. The sun had cleared the horizon by the time they reached Frontier Depot, a sprawling yard of rusting metal warehouses, once used to store and ship military surplus. Weeds sprouted through cracks in the concrete loading docks, and chain-link fences sagged under the weight of time. In the distance, huge steel doors stood like silent sentinels. They parked near a sign so faded the letters were almost unreadable. Keene Defense Logistics HQ. The main gates were wrapped in thick chains, but when Caleb scouted along the fence, he found a section so corroded he could peel it back. June's pulse quickened at the eerie hush. Here, she thought, was the legacy of Colonel Keene's shadow operations. Abandoned the moment scrutiny drew near. "If they're holding Solace anywhere, it'll be inside one of those buildings," Caleb murmured. A faint snort and a muffled clop of hooves reached their ears from the third warehouse. They moved carefully, Caleb motioning for June to stay back while he withdrew a handgun.
"Just in case," he whispered. Heart-pounding, June followed her eyes, scanning for any sign of lookouts. Inside the warehouse was dim, with light filtering through broken skylights. Rows of metal racks stood half-collapsed, tangled with cobwebs. Amid the dusty gloom came a gentle exhalation, the unmistakable breath of a horse. They turned a corner and found him. Solace stood near a makeshift pen constructed from old fencing sections. His front legs were loosely bound with a worn rope, and a ragged halter looped around his muzzle. He recognized June instantly, ears perking up, mismatched eyes locking onto hers with what she could only describe as relief. Caleb whispered, "Easy now," as June slipped into the pen, kneeling to untie the rope. Solace nudged her shoulder as if to say, "What took you so long?" June ran her hands over his coat, checking for injuries. He seemed unhurt, just fatigued and slightly dehydrated. "You're all right, big guy," she murmured, voice catching. "We're getting you out of here." As she combed through his mane, her fingers brushed against something rigid. Hidden beneath layers of hair was a small leather pouch, sealed with waterproof wax. Carefully, she tugged it free. Caleb joined her eyes widening at the object. That looks like a custom job. Let's open it. Inside the pouch was a rubber-sealed USB drive along with a folded sheet of paper. A hand-drawn map bearing the label, Keen Defense HQ. Restricted red ink circles marked specific rooms and corridors, one of which was scribbled with the words RT Data Vault. Caleb inhaled sharply. Red Trail. He turned to June. Elias told me once he suspected that the main evidence, footage, documents had been locked away after the fiasco at Red Trail. Could this map show the location of that hidden data repository? If so, we have a direct link to Colonel Keen's cover-up. June nodded, adrenaline surging. This means everything Elias suspected is real. Richard Keen might be alive, and the proof is in these files. They heard footsteps outside. June's heart jumped, but it was just the wind kicking debris against the warehouse wall. Caleb quickly pocketed the USB and map. We have to get Solace out. We can't stay here. He paused, glancing at her phone. What time is it? June fumbled to check. 7:38 a.m. She swore under her breath. Elias's final visitation was scheduled for around 9:15, and if they weren't there before that time, the prison would likely cancel it. The drive to Red Rock took over an hour through winding desert roads. We have less than 100 minutes, she said, voice taut, and we still need to show the warden or the prosecutor. Without further debate, they guided Solace outside. The horse stepped gingerly, clearly exhausted but trusting June's lead. Caleb tore a piece of tarp from a fallen crate, using it to patch a gap in the fence so they could exit safely without the Mustang spooking. Once beyond the perimeter, they led Solace to the SUV. There was no horse trailer, but the area behind the vehicle had space enough to tether him carefully. He'd be partially running behind, partially trotting alongside under normal circumstances. This would be risky, but time was too short to do anything else. Just as they finished securing Solace, June's phone buzzed with an incoming text. The screen displayed a short message from Red Rock Correctional. Please confirm your ETA immediately. Execution remains as scheduled. The 15-minute visit will be cancelled if you do not arrive by 9:15 a.m. EM. She read the clock again. 7:42 a.m. They had about 93 minutes. Damn it, she muttered. We're still an hour away at least, and that's if we push the speed. We need to contact Warden Clay Harlan now. Caleb dialed a number from his phone's stored contacts. Harlan is under massive pressure from the DA's office to keep this on schedule, he said between rings. But if we can show him the drive, or at least convince him we have legitimate new evidence, maybe he'll hold off. He left a terse voicemail identifying himself and stating they had critical proof that Colonel Keen orchestrated the entire frame job. I request an immediate audience with you at Red Rock Security Gate. We have a USB that needs secure analysis, sir. If you proceed with the execution without seeing it, the system will be killing an innocent man. While he spoke, June examined the USB. The letters R1 were etched along one side, reinforcing the possibility it contained data from Red Trail. Maybe it's video or files Elias smuggled out before they locked him up, she speculated. He must have hidden it on Solace, knowing no one else could approach the horse safely. Caleb ended the call and exhaled. We'll have to rely on ourselves to get there in time. If the warden is on board, he'll help. If not, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. They set off at top speed, the SUV vibrating over potholes and grit. June sat in the back seat holding Solace's lead through the open window, coaxing him to keep pace. She felt uneasy about it. Dragging a horse behind a speeding vehicle could be disastrous. But Caleb managed a careful balance, never accelerating so fast that Solace stumbled. The Mustang, perhaps sensing the urgency, trotted with remarkable steadiness. As they sped down the highway, they passed pockets of protesters on either side of the road. Some held placards reading "Justice for Elias," featuring his photo as a soldier. Others displayed signs that said "Execute the traitor" or "He murdered his own men." The atmosphere outside Red Rock had been building for days. The media had stirred public opinion into a frenzy. Now, with minutes ticking away, June felt that tension doubling back on them. Every mile felt like a step closer to a do-or-die moment. A few times a police cruiser or a local sheriff's truck slowed them, forcing them to reduce speed. But Caleb brandished an official retired military investigator ID, yelling out, "Emergency," assisting the DA, and the cops allowed them through. June kept glancing at her phone. 8:10, 8:20, 8. The prison was still some distance away. She was trembling, stroking Solace's neck each time they had to slow down for a turn. "Hang in there," she whispered. Just a bit more, buddy. We're almost there. At 8:35, the hulking silhouettes of Red Rock's watchtowers appeared on the horizon. Tall searchlights stood dormant at the top, ready for night operations. The main entrance was blocked by a throng of protesters, so Caleb detoured to a side gate, typically used for service vehicles. He rolled up to the security booth, hand already on his ID. A guard stepped out barking, "This area is restricted. State your business." "I'm Caleb Ward, retired Army investigator. This is June McAllister. We have urgent evidence for Warden Clay Harlan regarding inmate Elias Boone's case. Time sensitive. We must see him now." The guard eyed them skeptically, then saw Solace behind the SUV, flaring his nostrils and pawing the ground. "A horse? Are you people out of your mind?" "Look," June interjected, voice firm. "This is about that horse. Elias Boone's last request. The warden should be expecting us." The guard radioed in, and for a tense minute they waited. Meanwhile, Solace remained unnervingly calm, as though fully aware this was the final stretch. Finally, the speaker crackled. An unseen voice said, "Let them through. Escort to checkpoint Bravo." The guard scowled but raised the barrier. "Don't make me regret this," he muttered. Inside the sprawling prison campus, uniformed officers directed them to park near a secondary gate. The clock read 8:43 a.m. Stepping out, June and Caleb were met by Warden Clay Harlan himself, a solidly built man in a crisp uniform, whose grave expression betrayed his concern. Behind him, a handful of armed guards looked on warily at Solace. "What is all this about?" Harlan asked in a low, urgent tone. "You have evidence that can't wait?" Caleb gave a quick salute, more out of reflex than protocol. "Sir, we believe this USB device holds crucial data from Colonel Silas Keene's covert operations. It may prove that Elias Boone was framed. We also have a map referencing hidden records from the Red Trail fiasco." Harlan's eyes flicked from the USB in Caleb's hand to the black Mustang. "And the horse?" June laid a calming hand on Solace's neck. "Elias's final request was to see him. We suspect the horse was stolen last night to sabotage that request. If the information on this drive is genuine, the state could be about to execute an innocent man." The warden pressed his lips into a grim line. "All right, we'll analyze the data in our secure lab. There's no external internet there, just an isolated system for forensics. Ms. McAllister, you can keep the horse in the old training yard behind the facility. I'll post a guard to make sure nothing else happens to it." She exhaled relief. "Thank you. That's all I want. Just give us a chance to show you what's on this drive." He signaled to one of his officers. "Take them to Security Station 3, and watch the clock. The official procedure for lethal injection starts at 9:30. If we don't have a valid reason to stop it by then, you know how the chain of command works." They followed the officer through a series of fenced passages, every gate slamming shut behind them. Solace walked calmly at June's side, hooves echoing on the concrete. He showed no sign of panic at the armed men or the claustrophobic enclosures. It was as if the horse understood that in these final minutes, his composure might be the difference between life and death, not just for Elias but for the truth itself. At the station, they were ushered into a narrow control room dotted with monitors and a single secure terminal. Two technicians stepped forward with suspicious looks. "We have to scan any device for malware or viruses," one said. "If it's locked down, we'll attempt a cold boot read. That can take time." Caleb handed over the USB. "Work as fast as you can. We have less than 30 minutes. If you find anything that suggests new evidence, that might be enough to halt the execution." Outside the window, June could see a small chain-link fenced yard. An officer led Solace inside. The Mustang paced once, then stood in the patchy sunlight, tail flicking. She closed her eyes and silently urged the horse to wait patiently, at least until they could bring Elias out. Time seemed to accelerate. The technicians began typing commands, scanning directories. The clock on the wall read 8:50, then 8:55. June stole glances at her phone. No messages, no calls from the DA. The tension in the room thickened. Even the warden paced behind them, eyes shifting from the computer to the minutes ticking away. 9:05. 9:05. Finally, one technician murmured, "There's a folder labeled RT_actual, containing video files and encrypted documents, plus an audio file." He glanced over at Harlan. "It's all locked behind a password, but I can attempt a quick extraction." Harlan nodded. "Do it." The clicks of a keyboard filled the silence. Caleb pressed his hands together, knuckles whitening. June found it hard to breathe. Elias had only promised them a 15-minute window. If they went past 9:15, the visitation would be scrapped.
and the procedure might continue unimpeded. At 9:12, the technician managed to bypass the encryption on a single file. A grainy night vision video snippet popped onto the screen. Figures in military gear. A date stamp consistent with the aftermath of the Red Trail operation. One of the men removed a helmet, revealing a face that strongly resembled Colonel Silas Keene's younger brother, Richard. The very man, officially declared dead. The tech froze the frame, studying the metadata. "This is real footage," he whispered, sounding stunned. Caleb let out a soft breath. Richard Keene is alive, and he's staging a mortal injury. June, standing beside him, felt her knees threaten to buckle. They declared him killed in action, gave him honors, used it to close the Red Trail file. Yet here he is, clearly uninjured, orchestrating the entire death scene. The video lasted 6 minutes and 23 seconds. It ended with Richard swinging his legs off the cot, turning to speak to Colonel Keene once more. The final frames caught the colonel giving him a brisk nod, then stepping out of the shot. When the clip froze, the tension in the room crackled like static. Warden Harlan swallowed hard. If Richard was never dead, that calls the entire murder case against Boone into question. Good God. One of the technicians clicked on the next file labeled cover_OP_S_K. A hush fell. This time an audio waveform stretched across the screen with no accompanying video. Harlan signaled for the volume to be turned up. At first the sound was faint, as if recorded by a concealed device in a room with poor acoustics. Rustling papers and echoes of footsteps occasionally interrupted. Then, a man's voice, distinct and low, emerged. "Boone is the perfect shield. He's poking around our audit processes, like he still thinks he's a hero." A second voice asked something unintelligible. The clarity wasn't perfect, but the first speaker continued. "Richard is disappearing off the map. Announcing him KIA locks up all the records. Meanwhile, Boone will be the one to take the fall for anything else that surfaces. A scapegoat, bulletproof in terms of plausible motive. I've moved the last funds offshore. Bahamas, cheap price to handle such a noisy problem." The next lines were clearer. "He's not cunning enough to realize how deep this goes. By the time he figures it out, we'll have him pinned for far worse. Let him believe he's solving some corruption. We'll bury him." Then came the clicking of a keyboard followed by a calm automated voice. "Transfer confirmed." Caleb clenched his fists. That's definitely Colonel Silas Keene talking, planning how to set Boone up. June felt outrage swell in her chest. They used Elias' trust in the system to blindside him. He was investigating them. They turned him into a murderer in the eyes of the world. One technician checked the file's metadata. No sign of tampering. This appears authentic. We also found references to Richard in this dialogue. That alone could prove conspiracy if we match voice prints. Warden Harlan pressed his palm to his forehead. "We have a living Richard Keene, and Colonel Keene admitting the plan to frame Boone. We need to see if there's more." Eager to find the missing links, the technicians opened another file titled fin_trace_3 red. The screen filled with financial spreadsheets, detailing multiple wire transfers, complete with destination account numbers and coded references. At the top was a header, Keene Foundation, private ledger. The amounts were staggering, some in the range of millions of dollars. June leaned in, her eyes scanning the text. "They're funneling money into at least 3 major accounts." Caleb read the lines aloud. 1 pawn, a bogus account named E. Boone. The system logs indicated it was opened around the time Elias had begun his internal audit. Deposits from Keene Foundation seemed designed to look like bribes or hush payments. 2, a second account labeled Staff Delta, connected to a certain legal consultant inside the Army's upper ranks, possibly the same official who'd stonewalled any post-Red Trail investigations. 3, a Zurich-based account that apparently handled the death benefits for Richard Keene. Millions of dollars in insurance claims paid out after his staged demise. Another folder named OPIN contained a series of bullet points outlining a methodical frame job. 4, lure Elias to an out-of-the-way warehouse. Murder a small-time whistleblower, the fellow soldier Elias found dead. Plant Boone's knife and stage the scene. Disable cameras at critical junctures. Secure quick handover from military to civilian courts, ensuring minimal scrutiny. Maneuver the trial with friendly prosecution and suppressed evidence. Keep Richard's death official, shutting down any mention of his existence. Jim's face tightened with anger. They had a written blueprint. They systematically sacrificed Elias to conceal massive corruption. One technician typed rapidly, verifying cryptographic signatures. No signs of digital forgery. This is as legitimate as it gets. Silence followed. A single glance at the wall clock told them it was already 9:20. 10 minutes to the official procedure. Harlan's voice wavered as he finally spoke. All these files, they reveal an orchestrated conspiracy at the highest levels. If this is real, there's no question Boone is innocent. Caleb nodded. And we only have minutes to stop an irreversible act. The warden marched out into the corridor with a purposeful stride, phone in hand. He barked orders at a passing corrections officer. Summon the local DA, the state's attorney rep and the Army's CID liaison now. I want them on the line or in this room within 5 minutes. He paced near the security station, adrenaline coursing through him. All these years he had believed Elias Boone was just another convict, with a tragic war story. Now, in a single morning, everything had flipped. If they proceeded with the execution under these circumstances, it wouldn't just be a moral travesty, it would be a legal and political bombshell. Soon, a makeshift conference call was established via speakerphone. Nora Hastings, the district attorney assigned to oversee capital sentences in the region, answered in a clipped tone. A colonel from the Army's Criminal Investigation Division joined from a remote location, obviously stunned by what he was hearing. A public defender's representative was patched in as well, though they could hardly stammer a coherent sentence under the shock of the new evidence. Harlan let Caleb do the initial explanation, summarizing the USB findings. Live Richard Keene footage, Colonel Keene's admission, forged finances. The DA's voice tightened with skepticism. Why are we only hearing about this evidence now? It sounds conveniently timed. Caleb retorted, better late than never. And the reason is Colonel Keene's effort to bury it. He kidnapped the horse that carried the drive, presumably to sabotage any last-minute rescue. The real question is, are you going to let an innocent man die because the truth arrived too late for your liking? Harlan slammed his palm on a nearby desk. As warden, I can't stand by. I am requesting an immediate stay of execution. There is more than enough cause to halt this under emergency statute, especially since we have until 9:30. That's exactly what, 7 or 8 minutes from now. If you have reason to doubt the authenticity of these files, test them properly, but we can't kill the man while there's a shred of doubt. The DA paused, hearing the mounting outrage from everyone else. Reluctantly, she said, I'll escalate this to the governor's legal counsel, but if it's a forgery, it's on your heads. Then she hung up. Harlan wasted no time. He dialed the governor's direct line, only accessible to a handful of high-level officials. The phone rang. Each passing second felt like an eternity. At 9:25, the governor's aide answered. Within 2 minutes, the warden was speaking to the governor himself, breathless and succinct in describing the newly unearthed evidence. A tense hush fell over the room as the governor deliberated. Finally, he gave a curt instruction. We'll issue a stay on the condition that the evidence is found credible upon further examination. For now, do not proceed with the lethal injection. Relief tore through the group like a gust of cool wind. Harlan thanked the governor, voice shaking with gratitude. He spun to the nearest guard. Get to the execution chamber. Tell them to halt everything. Now, it was 9:30 a.m. sharp by the time the official phone call confirming the stay filtered through the labyrinth of Red Rock's chain of command. Yet in the execution chamber, the personnel had followed the set routine to the letter. Elias Boone had been escorted from his cell in a drab jumpsuit, wrists restrained. His face was pale, but he retained a quiet dignity, stepping without resistance or rancor. He heard the footsteps echo in the sterile hallway leading to the lethal injection room. The bright overhead lighting stung his eyes and the smell of antiseptic hung heavily in the air. A staff member guided him onto the gurney, as the straps tightened across his arms and torso. Elias's gaze remained distant, fixed on a point far beyond the walls. The absence of any last-minute news left him resigned. He believed no miracle was coming. At 9:45, the on-site medical personnel started checking IV lines, pressing cold alcohol swabs on his inner arm. Someone read from a short script about the procedure, a half-hearted attempt at formality. By 9:55, the final check was imminent. A faint beep from a heart monitor signaled that time was almost up. Then at 9:56 and 45 seconds, Warden Harlan burst into the chamber short of breath, an urgent directive bristling in his voice. Stop. I have a gubernatorial order for a stay of execution, effective immediately. The startled execution team glanced at one another, uncertain but compelled by the warden's authority. A senior guard who had earlier ridiculed Elias as the soldier gone mad, now rushed to unfasten the straps. The needle was withdrawn from Elias's vein with a gentle pull. Elias blinked, struggling to comprehend. He looked up at Harlan, voice hoarse. What's happening? Harlan placed a hand on Elias's shoulder. We have new evidence. It suggests you were framed. We don't know everything yet, but as of today, you are not going to die. We've obtained a stay. For a moment Elias's lips parted but no words emerged. He thought he must be dreaming. Another grotesque fantasy in the cycle of nightmares. Slowly the truth sank in, breaking through the numbness. He was alive. He was not going to die at 10 o'clock a.m. after all. As a pair of guards helped him sit up, the warden's radio crackled with updates about the chain of custody for the USB, about frantic calls from the DA's office, about protests growing outside. But for Elias the world felt strangely quiet, like the hush after a thunderclap. Everything else fell away except a distant sense of relief he could hardly believe was real. Guards guided Elias back through the corridors, away from the bright lights of the chamber. He walked in silence, the echo of footsteps reverberating against concrete. Adrenaline coursed through him, leaving a tingling in his fingertips. Less than 15 minutes ago he had been strapped down awaiting a fatal injection. Now he was heading back to the same cell that had been his cage for years. But the air around him felt different, charged with an unfamiliar sense of possibility. As they passed a chain-link fence enclosing a small training yard, Elias abruptly halted. Through the metal mesh he spotted Solace. The Mustang stood there, head raised, gazing straight at him. The horse's mismatched eyes, one pale, one brown, reflected the morning light. In that single look, Elias felt an unspoken reassurance. He stepped closer to the fence, letting one hand curl around the metal links. Solace inclined its head, almost in greeting, as if to confirm, "I am here, and you are still alive." A guard cleared his throat behind him. "We need to move, Boone." But the man's tone was softer than before, lacking the usual sneer. Elias tore his gaze away from the Mustang, nodding once. He continued down the corridor, mind a whirlwind of questions. What new evidence had they found? Was Richard truly alive? Had Silas orchestrated everything? Inside his cell, a faint beam of sunlight angled through a narrow slit near the ceiling, something he barely noticed in the past. He sank onto the metal stool, hands shaking with residual shock. Moments later an older guard approached, handing him a paper cup of water. It was a simple kindness, yet wholly unexpected. The guard mumbled, "Word is, a lot of people outside now believe you didn't do it." Elias took the cup, sipped, and nodded his gratitude. "Thank you," he managed. In that instant he realized a shift had occurred, both within the walls of Red Rock and beyond. A door to the truth had been cracked open, and somewhere Colonel Silas Keene's elaborate house of lies was surely trembling. Elias stared up at the ceiling. For the first time in half a decade, he dared to envision something besides the inevitability of death. He dared to imagine tomorrow, and the possibility that justice might yet be won. In the days immediately after Elias Boone's execution was stayed, the inside of Red Rock Correctional Facility felt like a hornet's nest of urgent activity. Guards whispered in corridors, phone lines buzzed with constant calls to higher authorities. Outside protesters clashed anew, some demanding a full exoneration, others accusing the system of coddling a traitor.
For the first time in 5 years, Elias sensed the weight of public scrutiny shifting in his favor. Yet it would take more than public outcry to tear down the forces that had conspired to put him on death row. When the governor's office officially validated the USB files, the responsibility to re-examine Elias's case fell to the district attorney now in charge of capital prosecutions. Enter Nora Hastings. Recently elected on an anti-corruption platform, she was renowned for her fearless approach in tackling systemic rout. Upon receiving the flagged evidence from Warden Clay Harlan and hearing about Colonel Silas Keene's manipulations, Hastings invoked a multi-jurisdictional collaboration. She coordinated with the DOJ Department of Justice to secure specialists in racketeering and financial crime. She requested the Army's Criminal Investigation Division (CID) reopen any red trail files. She also recruited private consultants, including experts in offshore banking and digital encryption. Among the new investigative team, one name stood out: Caleb Ward. Initially an informally involved ally for Elias, Caleb now joined as an official volunteer, providing a wealth of insider knowledge on how Colonel Keene had orchestrated shady deals over the years. Hastings convened them in a secure conference room at the state courthouse. "We're not simply verifying a single murder case," she declared. "We're dealing with potential high-level corruption spanning from the Army to private defense contracting to influential figures in the prosecutorial system. Every byte of data from that USB has to be verified for authenticity, and every lead it gives us must be pursued." The forensic specialists set to work analyzing the cryptographic signatures on the videos and audio files, while the banking experts pored over the spreadsheets that detailed millions funneled to offshore accounts. Meanwhile, Caleb used his old military contacts to confirm references to Project Bravo Field, the site glimpsed in the infrared clip where Richard Keene had staged his own death. Over the course of 48 hours, the group methodically pieced together a puzzle that threatened to topple major players in the defense industry. Their findings pointed to one inescapable conclusion: Colonel Silas Keene and his associates had systematically siphoned funds from Army budgets, faked Richard Keene's death to cover up stolen weapons and diverted resources, and hand-picked Elias as the scapegoat once he started sniffing around too closely. The next question was, where exactly was Richard Keene now? It was the CID that made the first definitive breakthrough. Digging into old departmental logs, they uncovered that the was recorded at Bravo Field, a clandestine extension of the Red Trail forward base. Bravo Field was long rumored to have been officially closed, yet budget lines indicated quiet monthly expenses. The digital watermark in the footage matched the base's internal cameras, suggesting no tampering. Cross-referencing Elias's old notes with partial data on Richard Keene's medical records, the team discovered that 3 years after Red Trail, someone with nearly identical biometrics had applied for a Brazilian passport under the alias Elias Brooks. Fingerprints and partial DNA captured during minor hospital visits in Sao Paulo matched 98% to the official Richard Keene. Additional hits popped up in the finances. The same alias was funneling large sums into a Brazilian registered mining enterprise called Novo Trace Limited, headquartered in the remote interior of Pará. Evidence from the USB also hinted that Keene Foundation grants were being laundered through Novo Trace, effectively legitimizing funds stolen from the U.S. Army. The pattern was classic: inflate departmental budgets for weapons procurement, mark half of them as destroyed or compromised, then reroute the money into private pockets. The staged death of Richard Keene had served as a dramatic distraction, allowing Keene to manipulate Red Trail's outcome without fear of his brother's future liabilities. One surprising detail was that Richard Keene's network had apparently monitored Elias even after he was placed on death row. Among the documents was an encrypted email chain referencing inmate 143 and how the horse might become a liability if misused. "How brazen can you get?" one DOJ analyst muttered, flipping through pages of logs. They basically spied on Elias's attempts at appeals from inside Red Rock. They wanted to make sure nothing new ever reached the courts. Caleb, reviewing these revelations, clenched his teeth. So Richard didn't just vanish, he continued running an enterprise like a puppet master from abroad. The man Keene swore was dead was alive and well, living under an alias stolen from Elias's own name. Shameless. Hastings vowed to contact Interpol requesting a cross-border operation. "If Richard is in Brazil, we can push for extradition, assuming we gather enough evidence to justify an international warrant. But first we must cement the conspiracy charge against Carl Keene's stateside." As the investigation dug deeper, a chilling timeline emerged. The plan for Richard Keene's death had been set in motion before Operation Red Trail ever commenced. Richard as a liaison officer. Officially, Richard Keene had joined Red Trail in a logistics support capacity. Unofficially, he had zero specialized skill for the assignment, suggesting his presence was purely to facilitate the hoax. 2. Preparation of blood packs and false documents. Medical records indicated that someone drew a sizable amount of Richard's blood ahead of the mission. Reports from the USB showed how stage footage was recorded, with Richard feigning mortal wounds, hooking up to IV bags of stored blood to simulate a catastrophic injury. 3. Official KIA declaration. As soon as the mission ended in confusion, the Army publicly listed Richard Keene among the fallen heroes. 2.4 million USD in death benefits was processed, going straight to Keene Foundation's account, presumably for charitable use. 4. Chaos exploited. Colonel Silas Keene orchestrated the theft of nearly 18 million USD worth of weapons and equipment during the post-Red Trail chaos. He labeled much of it as damaged beyond salvage. Meanwhile, those items were discreetly sold off or redirected into the black market to fuel further operations. 5. Elias Boone as the fall guy. Because Elias was the internal auditor who found discrepancies, Silas orchestrated a lethal warehouse setup. Once Elias stood accused of murder, there was no chance he could blow the whistle on the deeper financial wrongdoing.
Caleb's own reports on Red Trail, a trio of documents highlighting the suspicious nature of the mission, had languished in bureaucracy. He recalled confronting a general who simply said, "You don't want to cross Silas Keene." People in the Pentagon address him by his first name. That's how tight his connections run. Now, the scandal was on the verge of erupting. Journalists sniffed around the courthouse daily. Social media fed on rumors that a well-decorated colonel had masterminded a scheme to profit from stolen weapons, leaving a loyal soldier rotting in a cell. The velocity of public outrage grew with each new leak. Elias's name popped up in forums and news segments, under two competing narratives. Was he a tragic scapegoat undone by his naive faith in the chain of command? Or was he secretly complicit? That question lingered. But as official documents and newly freed testimony poured in, the tide swung sharply in Elias's favor. One vital piece in the puzzle was how Elias's original trial had been so thoroughly rigged. The investigation soon zeroed in on Assistant District Attorney Cynthia Legrand, the lead prosecutor who aggressively pursued the capital sentence against Elias. Hastings' team discovered that Legrand had received a national security research grant from the Keene Foundation shortly before the case. Publicly, it looked legitimate, an award supporting legal frameworks around defense contract, but further digging revealed that after Elias's conviction, Legrand was fast-tracked to a senior position in a high-profile law firm that specialized in defense industry lobbying. A shell company traced back to Keene Logistics regularly deposited quarterly sums into a bank account in Belize registered under the name of Legrand's cousin. Legrand had also been behind critical moves, blocking any requests to re-examine the Red Trail mission logs, rejecting an independent forensic expert who questioned the blood on Elias's clothes, insisting on a swift trial with minimal witness cross-examinations. While reviewing these findings, DA Nora Hastings held up a thick folder in a press briefing. This is a testament to how unscrupulous actors turn the justice system into a weapon. Legrand's actions effectively sold out a soldier's life for personal career gains. We owe Elias Boone the truth, and we owe the public an apology. The next day, an arrest warrant was issued for Cynthia Legrand on charges of obstruction of justice and conspiracy. She had, however, abruptly left the country, heading to London on a business trip for her firm. Media outlets speculated she would try to vanish in Europe rather than face the consequences. Interpol notices were swiftly posted, putting another name on the target list of the expanding scandal. With each new disclosure, the media transformed Elias Boone's story from possible murderer to unethical whistleblower. Leading newspapers ran front-page headlines: "Traitor or betrayed," "Hero," "From death row to whistleblower," "The unmasking of Elias Boone." 24-hour news channels replayed clips from the infrared footage that proved Richard Keene was alive, fueling a frenzy on social platforms. Hashtags like "Justice for Boone" trended worldwide, garnering millions of mentions. Veteran advocacy groups launched petitions decrying the injustice. Some recounted how Elias had earned his Bronze Star rescuing fellow soldiers. "He's not just innocent," one group spokesperson said. "He's a man who put his life on the line for his country, only to be sacrificed by those who wanted to profit from a war." Outside Red Rock Correctional Facility, the previously divided crowd of protesters saw a dramatic shift. Candlelight vigils replaced the angry chants for execution. Cards and flowers were stuck into the chain-link fences. Soldiers who once served near Elias gave interviews, recalling how he had saved their convoy from an ambush, or had meticulously gone by the book in ethical matters. "That man wouldn't kill a fellow soldier," said an ex-corporal on camera. "He'd risk his hide first." Within 48 hours, the storyline had flipped. News vans lined the desert highway, leading to Red Rock. Calls poured into the warden's office demanding direct quotes from Elias. The prison fielded requests for exclusive interviews, but he declined them all, busy assisting the investigating officers with every detail he remembered about Red Trail, Bravo Field, and Colonel Keene's manipulation. Online conspiracy theories mutated into tangential side stories about the government, the arms industry, and black market deals. Yet the core truth remained: Elias Boone had been framed to bury the largest internal scandal in the Red Trail saga. The public's appetite for more revelations only grew with each passing day. Amid the media storm, the Department of Justice instructed Red Rock Correctional to grant Elias a measure of freedom. On a clear afternoon, for the first time in 5 years, he walked out of the death row wing unshackled and wearing civilian clothes. Guards escorted him, but not in the usual manner. There was no hostility now, just a certain respectful distance. They led him to a small administrative conference room where DA Nora Hastings waited with a few of her team members and a representative from the Army's SID. The table was strewn with printouts of the USB data, photos of Richard in Brazil, and bank statements detailing the forged Boone account. When Elias entered, Hastings stood hands clasped before her. "Major Boone," she said, using his rank for the first time, "thank you for agreeing to this. I'd like you to know that we believe you and we need your help clarifying details we found. If you're willing." Elias scanned the table, a surreal array of evidence that might finally clear his name. "I'm ready," he replied, voice steadier than he expected. One by one they walked him through the digital footprints. The memos referencing Richard's covert movements, the hush payments from Silas's foundation. They showed him specific locations on a blueprint labeled A3 or secured depot that lined up with the map hidden with Solace. Elias pointed to certain notes. "I recognize this. That's the building Richard used to visit weekly, even though official logs said it was vacant. I've filed a report about it once, maybe twice, but nobody wanted to hear it." Hastings took notes, nodding grimly. "We know. The paper trail indicates your reports were intercepted by an internal reviewer on Keene's payroll. They never reached the top brass." The Army SID liaison then asked, "Major Boone, if we succeed in fully exonerating you, would you testify to help prevent future cases like yours?" He met the man's gaze firmly. "I spent 5 years in solitary for a crime I didn't commit. No one else should endure that. Yes, I'll testify. I want to make sure no other soldier becomes collateral damage for unscrupulous profiteers." Hastings let out a quiet sigh, half relief, half sorrow for what he had lost. "We'll do everything in our power to see you freed as soon as possible," she promised. "Let's get to work." Days stretched into weeks as the investigation hammered nails into Colonel Silas Keene's coffin of lies. Federal warrants were issued. Subpoenas arrived at key offices. By then it had become clear that Elias Boone was not just a victim but a catalyst for major reform. Yet a formal exoneration still required a judicial process. That moment arrived sooner than anyone anticipated, culminating in a dramatic hearing that would forever alter Elias's fate. A month after the death row stay, a special session convened at the federal courthouse. The benches were packed with journalists, caged-in cameras, and military personnel in dress uniforms. Elias, wearing a simple suit borrowed from Warden Harlan's personal stash, stood before the bench, flanked by his newly appointed defense counsel and DA Nora Hastings. The presiding federal judge had read the new evidence in chambers. His voice carried a solemn weight as he began. "This court is convened to reassess the conviction of Elias Boone in the murder of Private Nathaniel Floyd, the charge that led to a capital sentence." He paused, lips thinning. Given the extraordinary evidence presented, it appears Mr. Boone was the subject of an elaborate conspiracy orchestrated by Colonel Silas Keene and accomplices. The alleged victim's cause of death, the forensic analyses, and the prosecutorial conduct all point to a travesty of justice. He then addressed Elias directly. "Major Boone, you stand here today, not as the accused but as the victim of a national-level fraud. This court finds you not guilty of the murder for which you were condemned. Moreover, we declare you to have acted in good faith throughout, attempting to expose wrongdoing." Behind him, officials from the Army stepped forward to restore his rank in absentia, removing the official black mark that had turned him from a decorated soldier into a dishonored felon. The judge concluded, "You are hereby fully exonerated. On behalf of this bench and the institutions we represent, we extend our sincerest apologies." Elias barely breathed, mind reeling. Applause thundered in the gallery. He turned to see a row of veterans, some he recognized, some strangers, standing with tears in their eyes. The judge banged his gavel to maintain decorum, but the emotional resonance in the chamber was unstoppable. After half a decade, Elias's name was finally cleared. Shortly afterward, a joint statement from the state government and federal authorities announced a $12.5 million settlement for Elias Boone, restitution for wrongful imprisonment and the severe personal toll inflicted on him. Elias accepted the sum quietly. He had no desire for riches, only to repair lives that had been shattered. First among them was June McAllister. She had stood by him despite her own battles with thyroid cancer and the chemotherapy that ravaged her body. Determined to help her fully recover, Elias allocated $500,000 for a cutting-edge immunotherapy program in New Mexico, rumored to offer breakthroughs in late-stage conditions. Within 3 months, June's medical charts showed significant improvement. Her hair grew back in soft auburn waves and her energy levels rose markedly. No longer was she a frail figure. She began to reclaim the spirited determination Elias had once admired so deeply. In between her treatments, she visited him daily at a modest rental home near the outskirts of Austin. They spoke of the future with tentative hope, unsure how to define their relationship after so many lost years. But there was no rush, one step at a time, June would say, echoing the methodical nature of horse training, and each step brought them closer to a new normal. With the remainder of his settlement, Elias decided to create a non-profit organization named Vigilance Alliance, dedicated to helping wrongfully convicted veterans, individuals suffering from combat trauma, those who had fallen through the cracks of the military justice system. He chose Austin as the headquarters, a city with a vibrant culture and strong veteran support networks. He then established a satellite campus at Dry Creek Trail, once an underused Army training area. The site was converted into a refuge for ex-soldiers needing to reacclimate to civilian life, especially those facing legal or emotional struggles reminiscent of Elias's own ordeal. The founding team included a retired military lawyer who specialized in appeals for unjust conviction, Caleb Ward, who stepped forward to help with investigative training for volunteers, several ex-inmates who had beaten wrongful charges and now wanted to pay their empathy forward, and of course Solace, the black Mustang that had become a living emblem of resilience and unwavering loyalty. Though major news networks clamored for exclusives, Elias granted only a single interview to a regional station. "I'm not here to talk about the past anymore," he told the reporter. "I'm here to make sure no one else endures what I did. That's the purpose of Vigilance Alliance." Sensing the sincerity in his words, the station aired a heartfelt segment. Donations poured in from across the country, fueling expansions to the Alliance's legal aid program. Soon they were handling multiple cases of veterans who had been pinned with crimes they never committed, some because of incompetent representation, others because of hidden military politics. Every success story drew new supporters, every stumbling block fueling Elias's determination. One crisp autumn morning, Elias swung himself onto Solace's back at the perimeter of Dry Creek Trail. Here, years ago, he had marched under orders, rifle in hand. Now he wore no uniform, no shackles, no ID badge labeling him a prisoner. The only constraints around him were the gentle contours of the southwestern horizon. Solace trotted forward, hooves tapping a rhythmic beat on the dusty ground. The air smelled of sagebrush and a distant promise of winter. At times Elias had fantasized about the day he might ride freely again, but those fantasies had felt dangerous, fueling despair if they proved impossible. Yet here he was, real as daylight. He guided Solace up a low ridge. The path was scattered with small stones and the Mustang navigated them effortlessly. At the crest, Elias paused. The sky stretched across the horizon in a brilliant sweep of blue dotted with high clouds. He rested a hand on the horse's neck. "For 5 years we were both caged," he murmured. "But we're still here. We made it." No paparazzi cameras lurked. No one told him where he could or couldn't go. Freedom, he realized, wasn't merely leaving a cell. It was the power to decide your path, your pace. Freedom is not just being let out, Elias had written in a personal notebook, but choosing where to stand. On the property that now served as the Vigilance Alliance's rehabilitation ranch, Solace quickly bonded with a young abandoned foal named Scout. The small horse had been rescued from a neglect situation, brought in trembling and half-starved. Solace's protective instincts shone unexpectedly, guiding Scout away from trouble, teaching it how to respond to gentle human cues. Elias often watched them from a distance. The older Mustang would allow the foal to nip playfully at his mane, only to nudge it back into line whenever it got too bold. The scene struck Elias as a living metaphor. Two creatures who'd been written off, one by war, the other by neglect, finding purpose in caring for each other. Renewed life wasn't about returning to the old ways. It was about forging something new from the ashes. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch became a haven for anxious veterans, some of whom had read about Elias's journey. The presence of Solace and Scout helped them ease into therapy, learning to connect with the animal's silent empathy. And with each life they saved, human or equine, Elias felt another piece of his shattered faith in humanity fall back into place. A year after his release, Elias Boone stood at the podium of the Texas state capitol. The chamber was hushed, rows of legislators and spectators waiting for him to speak. He wore a modest charcoal suit, and at his side stood Solace, the black Mustang who had unwittingly carried the key to his salvation. Elias had been invited to address a special legislative committee exploring military justice reform. Cameras clicked and flashed, capturing the moment for the evening news. The sight of a large horse calmly standing in the marbled halls might have been surreal at any other time, But by now Solace was as much a part of the story as Elias himself. Clearing his throat, Elias spoke steadily into the microphone. This is not about me, ladies and gentlemen. It's about the 36 veterans currently sitting in prison, with strong evidence suggesting they too might be innocent. It's about the hundreds more who were silenced before they could even be heard. The auditorium listened intently, many leaning forward. When he uttered the phrase, "those who have been forgotten," Solace dipped his head, as though prompt. The effect was electric. Several people gasped. Others exchanged glances of wonder. It felt like a stage cue, but there was no orchestration here. Only the mysterious synergy between man and horse that had defied explanation from the start. In the silence that followed, Elias let the gesture speak for itself. Then he continued, "I'm living proof that our system can fail. But I'm also proof that when good people stand up, that failure can be corrected. No one, soldier or civilian, should be cast aside to protect corruption. I ask you to join me in ensuring that what happened at Red Trail and to me never happens again." The room rose to its feet. News clips of Solace bowing would flood the internet within minutes, capturing imaginations far beyond Texas. Some dubbed it the most moving moment in modern legislative history. Later, Elias would admit privately that he had no idea why Solace had chosen that moment to bow his head, but it felt like destiny. Amid the reforms Elias championed, the Vigilance Alliance expanded to include a specialized Mustang rescue and therapy program. Once her health stabilized, June took the lead, moving permanently to the ranch. She oversaw dozens of rescued wild horses, each with a story of abandonment or abuse. Under her guidance, veterans grappling with PTSD could learn gentling techniques that promoted both trust building and emotional regulation. In structured sessions, June introduced them to a form of silent communication with the horses, reading body language, offering nonverbal reassurance. Many found it easier to process their traumas in the presence of an animal that didn't judge or speak back, only responded with genuine instinct. Over time, the ranch saw transformations that felt near miraculous. Anxious veterans finally sleeping through the night, traumatized survivors learning to open up again. Scout, by now a sturdy young horse, became a sort of mascot for the entire operation. Occasionally it would frolic around Solace, trotting circles as if demanding attention. Solace, ever patient, taught the full boundaries with a nudge or a light nip. Visitors often commented that watching them was a therapy in itself, an affirmation that second chances weren't just a human concept. June took solace, pun intended, in the daily routines. Early mornings found her brushing Scout's coat, instructing newly arrived veterans on how to approach a weary horse. In the afternoons she met with local nonprofits to coordinate rescue missions for more neglected Mustang. Evenings, she updated the ranch's medical logs, tracking each equine resident's progress. The synergy of healing, humans and horses side by side, had become her life's calling. After months of international leads, the FBI finally located Richard Keene in Lisbon, Portugal. He had been living under yet another alias, prepared to board a flight to a non-extradition country. Ironically, what gave him away was his attempt to travel with a prized miniature horse, chipped for veterinary identification. When airport authorities scanned the animal's implant, it flagged a mismatch with Richard's passport. Interpol swiftly stepped in. News of Richard's arrest rippled across the globe. Journalists hounded Elias for a response, but he merely said, "I have no desire to see him. Justice has found a swifter horse than me." Colonel Silas Keene, already in custody stateside, faced an expanding list of federal charges. Richard was extradited soon after, his illusions of safety shattered by the very concept microchipped horses that had once proved lethal to Elias's enemy. To many onlookers, the downfall of the Keene brothers felt like poetic retribution. They had tried to harness the legal system, illusions of warfare and even equine trickery to line their pockets. In the end, a single Mustang had undone their careful tapestry of lies. In the wake of the scandal, a documentary film titled Solace, The Last Ride generated massive buzz, chronicling Elias's ordeal, June's devotion, and the role of a single black Mustang in unraveling a national conspiracy. The film was nominated for an Emmy. Audiences worldwide resonated with the core theme that an animal's loyalty and a soldier's integrity could triumph over the most insidious corruption. Major magazines placed Elias Boone on their covers. Time named him Most Inspiring Individual of the Year. Curiously, the feature article led not with an image of Elias triumphant, but with a lone photograph of Solace standing in the green pastures of Sweetwater. The editorial explained, "The real hero of this story is not man or system, but the unspoken bond that refused to break." When a reporter asked Elias how he felt about winning, he gave a characteristic half smile and answered, "I haven't won anything. I'm just alive to make things right. He reiterated that his mission wasn't to seek glory, but to prevent what nearly happened to him from happening to anyone else. Behind the spotlight, life went on. Vigilance Alliance processed new cases, shedding light on more shady practices in the military courts. June's therapy ranch continued bridging the gap between traumatized veterans and unbroken Mustangs. Solace, older and calmer than ever, grazed the fields each morning with Scout at his flank, an enduring testament to second chances. And so the story drew to a close. But it did not end. It became a guiding star for reformers, an emblem of hope for the unfairly condemned, and a reminder that truth can emerge from the unlikeliest corners. In a nation that had come perilously close to executing an innocent man, the legacy of Elias Boone and his Mustang echoed far beyond the fences of Red Rock Correctional Facility, reminding the world that sometimes, the quietest loyalties and the simplest acts of courage can reshape the future for us all. For more captivating stories like this one, and don't miss out, hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. Dr. Harlan held the report tightly. What they thought was a crime might have been a cover-up all along. Some farewells don't need words, just a breath, a touch, and a truth too deep for judgment. Some farewells don't need words, just a breath, a touch, and a truth too deep for judgment. Some farewells don't need words, just a breath, a touch, and a truth too deep for judgment. Some farewells don't need words, just a breath, a touch, and a truth too deep for judgment. Deputy Voss lowered his voice. He never asked for freedom, only for one moment of truth. Some farewells don't need words, just a breath, a touch, and a truth too deep for judgment. Deputy Voss lowered his voice. He never asked for freedom, only for one moment of truth. Some farewells don't need words, just a breath, a touch, and a truth too deep for judgment.